Now let's start with today's story. I was sitting in my chair in the living room when Janet came home from work. I looked up from my book as she walked in, dropping her bag by the door with a deep breath. Something about her energy was different, focused, determined. "Hey," I said, setting the book aside. "How was work?" She walked over, but instead of sitting next to me like she usually did, she stood there for a moment, twisting the ring on her finger. Then, with a sigh, she finally sat down. "It was fine," she said, but there was something off in her voice. I studied her for a moment. "What's on your mind?" She exhaled and met my eyes. "I need to talk to you about something." I sat up, fully attentive now. "Okay." She took a moment before speaking again. "Ever since my cancer diagnosis, my perspective has shifted. I don't want to waste time anymore. I want to live fully, to experience everything life has to offer while I still can." I nodded. I'd known this. It was why we'd taken our trips, why she'd started all these new activities. "I get that," I said, "and I support it. You know that." She smiled, but it was brief. Then she took another deep breath and said, "I want a hall pass." The words didn't register at first. "A hall pass?" I repeated. She nodded. "A one-time opportunity to be with someone else. Sexually." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. "You're serious?" She nodded again, watching me carefully. I blinked, feeling a strange mix of emotions rise up in me. "Why?" "Because I don't want to feel like I'm missing out on anything," she said softly. "I've never been with anyone but you, Martin. And after everything that's happened, I don't want to feel handcuffed from doing things I want to do." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. She sat across from me, hands folded on the kitchen table, her expression unreadable. I still couldn't believe what she had just said. "A hall pass," I repeated, my voice flat. "With someone from work." She nodded. "Yes. He's leaving the company, so I'll never see him again. It's the perfect opportunity." Perfect. That word sat like a stone in my stomach. "You've always been attracted to him?" She sighed. "There's always been something there, yes. But I never acted on it. I never even considered it until now." I rubbed my temples, feeling the beginnings of a headache. "And you think this one time, this will what? Make you feel fulfilled? Complete?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I just know I don't want to go through life wondering what it would have been like. And I don't want to resent you for saying no." I looked at her sharply. "So if I say no, you'll be mad at me?" She hesitated. Disappointed. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's rich. I say no to my wife sleeping with another man, and I'm the bad guy? It would just confirm." She stopped herself, shaking her head. "Confirm what, Janet?" I pressed. She exhaled. "That you're insecure." I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed. "So now I'm insecure? If you weren't, this wouldn't be such a big deal." I stared at her, incredulous. "You're telling me that after 20+ years of marriage, my unwillingness to let you sleep with someone else means I have a problem?" "I'm not saying you have a problem, Martin," she said softly. "I'm saying this is important to me, and I need you to trust me." I shook my head. "That's not trust. That's coercion. You're asking for permission while already punishing me for saying no." Silence stretched between us. I ran a hand over my face. "I appreciate that you talked to me about it instead of just doing it behind my back. But you're putting me in a no-win situation. Either I agree, or I'm the villain in my own marriage." She looked down at the table. "I'm sorry you see it that way." We didn't say much else that night. The next morning, I woke up to find her sitting on the edge of the bed, already dressed. She turned to me with a small, sad smile. "I realized something," she said. "It's unfair to put this all on you. So I'm taking the decision away from you." I sat up slowly, my stomach twisting. "What does that mean?" She swallowed. "I booked a hotel near the restaurant where we're having his send-off party." My body went cold. "I'll spend the night there with him," she continued. "And I hope you'll be here when I get back." My jaw tightened. "You made up your mind?" She nodded. "You're not even telling me who he is?" "No," she said gently. "Because I know you. You'll dwell on it, obsess over it, and it'll make it worse. The less you know, the better." I let out a bitter laugh. "That's funny, considering you said I could ask you anything after it happens." She gave me a look, one that told me she already knew I wouldn't ask, that she was counting on it. I stared at her, my mind a storm of emotions I couldn't fully process. Part of me thought, at least she was being honest. She'd been through so much with the cancer, and maybe this was just part of her trying to reclaim something. Who was I to say how that experience had changed her? Maybe I should just let it happen. Maybe this was her way of dealing with what she'd been through. But another part of me, an angrier, more grounded part, wanted to put my foot down. To tell her no, this is not going to happen. And if she did it anyway, well, I'd deal with the consequences when they happened. Then she brought up how Kathy gave her this amazing advice. Of course, Kathy had an opinion on this. Let me clarify, taking advice from her is just like listening to Mia Khalifa giving a speech on keeping your virginity till marriage. Kathy called me callous? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. Janet nodded, arms crossed. Yes, She thinks you have no idea what I've been through, and it's unfair for you to shut this down without considering my perspective. I exhaled sharply. You mean Kathy, your single best friend who's been telling you to live your best life since college? That Kathy? Her lips pressed into a thin line. She cares about me. I ran a hand over my face. That same Kathy, that sleeps with every guy named Roger. She also has no stake in our marriage. Easy for her to say, isn't it? She's not the one who has to deal with the fallout of this. She doesn't have to wake up next to you and wonder if the last 20 years meant nothing. Hasn't she been divorced multiple times, and you are taking advice from that bitch? That's not fair, she shot back. I never said our marriage meant nothing. You don't have to. Your actions are saying it for you. She sighed, rubbing her temples. I just don't understand why you're making this such a big deal. It's one night. With a man I will never see again. It won't change how I feel about you. I let out a short laugh. It already has, Janet. Just you asking me for this has changed things. And now you're telling me that if I don't go along with it, I'm the villain? She was quiet. I shook my head. And you really think our marriage can go back to normal after this? I think we can move past it, she said carefully. I stared at her, and for the first time in over 2 decades, I didn't recognize the woman in front of me. Or maybe you think I'll just accept it, I murmured. That I won't throw away 20+ years of marriage over one encounter. Her eyes flickered. Maybe she had been thinking the same thing, that I wouldn't leave. That I wouldn't destroy everything over one mistake. But was it a mistake if she planned it? If she told me to my face that it was happening whether I liked it or not? Who is he? I asked suddenly. She frowned. I told you, that doesn't matter. It matters to me. You'll obsess over it, she said, shaking her head. You'll compare yourself to him, wonder what he has that you don't. You'll make it worse. I think it's already as bad as it can get, I said bitterly. That's exactly why you don't need to know. I studied her, trying to understand. Trying to see the woman I married in the person sitting across from me. Is he married? I asked. She hesitated. I felt my stomach drop. Does his wife know? She looked away. Jesus, Janet, I whispered. You don't even know if he's cheating on his own wife with you? That's not my responsibility, she said, her voice firm. This is about me. About us. I scoffed. No, Janet. This is about you. Just you. She sighed, leaning back in her chair. So what are you going to do? I didn't have an answer. I could let this happen and live with the knowledge that my wife had been with another man, and that she had no regrets about it. Or I could walk away from the life we built together at 54, starting over with nothing but resentment and regret. Not really great options on either front. I sat on the cold bench across the street from the bar, my hands clenched into fists in my lap. The neon lights flickered against the pavement, casting long shadows of the people coming and going. I had been sitting there for over an hour, my thoughts a mess of anger, disbelief, and something worse, something I couldn't quite name. Janet had texted me earlier, just like I asked. Are you really going to go through with this? She replied, I am not answering any more questions tonight. I will see you tomorrow. And that was it. No hesitation. No second guessing. Just a closed door, a finality that made my stomach turn. So I blocked her. I didn't want to see any more of her words. They didn't mean anything anymore. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, staring at the entrance of the bar. I had told myself I wasn't going to do this. That following her would only make things worse. That I didn't want to see. But I needed to. I needed to see him. The man who was worth throwing away 20+ years of marriage. People started trickling out of the bar, some calling cabs, others walking to their cars. I recognized one of Janet's co-workers, a woman I'd met a few times at office parties. She got into a cab alone, disappearing into the night. Then a larger group came out. I sat up straighter, my pulse in my throat. They were all gathered around one guy, shaking his hand, hugging him, laughing. This must be him. I searched their faces, trying to guess. And then the crowd thinned, and I saw him properly. Short, fat, bald. My breath caught in my chest, not out of jealousy, but something closer to nausea. This was the man. I had prepared myself for someone younger, someone fit, someone who had something. Anything. That made this make sense. But this? I felt sick. For the briefest moment, I thought maybe, Janet had changed her mind. Maybe she'd had her fun at the bar and decided it wasn't worth it. But then she stepped outside. She looked around quickly, then found him. Without hesitation, she took his hand. And together, they walked toward the hotel. I gripped the edge of the bench, my nails digging into the wood. My mouth went dry, and all the emotions I had been bracing for hit me at once. Anger, sadness, humiliation. But most of all, disgust. I didn't even recognize her. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, like I was wading through thick water. I followed them from a distance, not because I still needed to see. No, I had seen enough, but because I felt like I wasn't even in control of my own body. When they reached the hotel doors, I stopped. I watched her disappear inside with him, hand in hand, without looking back. Then I turned around and went home. I woke up Sunday morning with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in days. Maybe weeks. It wasn't anger or grief, just a cold, steady certainty about what needed to be done. I got out of bed, drove to the hardware store, and bought a lock for the master bedroom door. I didn't even hesitate. When I got back, I packed up her things and moved them into the spare room. I didn't throw them or break anything. No dramatics, no rage, just quiet efficiency. Then I grabbed a notepad from the kitchen, jotted down a short message, and left it on her dresser. Find other accommodations as soon as possible. I stood there for a moment, staring at the words. It felt final. Then I walked out. I went to see a friend, someone I trusted, who also happened to be a lawyer. He gave me straightforward advice, the kind I needed to hear. No sugarcoating. He even gave me a couple of names, attorneys who could help me make this official. He said he'd make the introductions. I felt something close to relief. That feeling only lasted until my phone started buzzing. It was around 11 when Janet started calling. Over and over. At first, I listened to the voicemails. Martin, please call me back. I need to talk to you. Please, just pick up. By the third one, her voice had an edge of panic. Why aren't you answering? We need to talk about this. You're scaring me. Scaring her? I blocked her number. It wasn't satisfying in a petty way, it was just necessary. I didn't owe her a conversation. Not after she had made every decision without me. I hadn't planned to stay out overnight, so eventually, I had to go home. I pulled into the driveway around 9, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. The house was quiet. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard her voice behind me. Martin, what's going on? Can we talk? I didn't turn around. I just kept walking. I thought we talked about this. At the door to my bedroom now, I finally spoke. I'm not interested in discussing this tonight. I stepped inside and locked the door behind me. For a while, I could hear her outside, pacing. Then, when she realized I wasn't coming back out, she left me alone. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I felt like a coward for shutting her out, for not standing in front of her and saying every angry, disgusted thought in my head. But I just couldn't look at her. Not yet. Monday morning, I got up, got ready for work, and headed downstairs. Janet was waiting for me. She looked nervous. Not guilty. Not ashamed. Just unsure. Like she was testing the waters. Can we discuss getting back to normal? She asked. I stared at her. I almost laughed. You've been doing all the talking for both of us this past week, I said. Why don't you continue? Then I walked out the door. I had an appointment with the divorce attorney later that week. But for now, I had to live with her in the interim. I went for a long drive just to clear my mind. When I returned, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the house. I didn't want to go inside. Not because I was afraid of another fight with Janet. I was past that. But because I had no interest in any conversation at all. But eventually, I had to go in. And that's when I walked straight into an ambush. Janet's friends were waiting for me, along with my mother-in-law. I barely had time to close the door before they launched into it. She's been through so much, Martin. You have no idea what it's like to face something like she did. This was just a one-time thing, at least she told you. She could have hidden it. She'll never see the guy again. Why are you punishing her for this? And my personal favorite, you are an absolute a-hole for what you've been putting her through these last couple of days. I just stood there, arms crossed, listening with a dumbfounded smirk. I wasn't shocked by what they were saying. No, I expected some kind of damage control. But I was a little surprised by the sheer audacity of it. Janet, the woman who knowingly threw a grenade into our marriage, was now the victim? And I was the villain for not just accepting it? When they finally ran out of steam, I looked around at all of them and said, "Are you done now?" Silence. Then I turned to Janet. "Is there anyone else you forgot to tell?" I asked, my voice calm. "Because at this point, it seems like you've made this a public event." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I turned back to her friends. "Since you all felt comfortable shaming and verbally abusing me for having a perfectly normal reaction to my wife cheating on me, I think it's only fair that I sit down with your husbands and let them know exactly what kind of people you are." Expressions shifted. Eyes darted around. That shut them up real quick. "Now get out." One by one, they left, some huffing, others awkwardly silent. My mother-in-law gave me a disappointed look before following them. When they were finally gone, Janet exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. "I regret the whole thing," she muttered. I snorted. "Regret isn't remorse." Her eyes shot up to mine. "You regret it because of the consequences. Because your life will never be the same. Because our relationship will never be the same." She flinched, but didn't argue. "You regret it because you never actually considered me at all." She swallowed hard. Then, after a moment, she said, "If you have any questions, I'll answer them, no matter how disturbing." I stared at her, feeling absolutely nothing. "Just one," I said. "Not why him. I honestly couldn't care less about that. But why someone else in the first place?" She closed her eyes briefly before answering. The cancer scared me, she said softly. It shook me to my core. I felt like I was running out of time. And stepping out of that tunnel was appealing. She let out a slow breath. After all this time of being a wife and mother, of worrying about family, this was just something for me. An escape. She hesitated before adding. And he was just someone who had been interested in me for a long time. I knew he wouldn't say no. And he was completely opposite of you. I scoffed. Yeah, no kidding. Then I looked her dead in the eyes. If I was going to risk my marriage, the woman would have to be a serious upgrade from you. People screw up, they don't screw down. I leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, watching her. I saw you, I said. Janet blinked. What? That night, I clarified. I saw you and him coming out of the bar. I watched you walk away, hand in hand, toward the hotel. Her face paled. You two looked too familiar, I continued. So tell me, was something going on before all this? She shook her head quickly. No, Martin. It was just that one night. That's all. I exhaled sharply. Who knows if that's the truth or not? She looked at me then, like she was trying to gauge if I believed her. I didn't. After all our years together, I said, your lack of respect for me is astonishing. She swallowed. I would never be able to look at myself in the mirror again if I condoned this level of disrespect and stayed with you. She opened her mouth, but I wasn't finished. I hope we can go our separate ways amicably, I said. I have an appointment with a lawyer later this week. She straightened up, her expression hardening. I'm not going anywhere. I let out a humorless laugh. Janet. No, she cut me off. We're not getting a divorce. I will give you all the time you need. Do whatever you need to recover from this. But we will get past this. No, we won't. Yes, we will. I shook my head. I'm not going to marriage counseling, Janet. Why not? It could help. Why would I go to counseling? I snapped. I did nothing to warrant needing a therapist's advice. I didn't step out of our marriage. I didn't betray you. I didn't lie to you. This is on you, and I'm done. She stared at me, chest rising and falling. For the first time, she looked truly desperate. But I wasn't moved. I had her served with divorce papers the following week. Along with them, I gave her a notice to vacate. The house was my premarital asset, and she had no claim to it. She fought me on it at first, but eventually, she moved in with her mom. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. She kept coming by. First, it was under the guise of checking in. Do you need anything? Are you eating? How's work? Then it shifted. What if we had an open relationship, only on your side? That one made me laugh. Then she tried again. What if we had threesomes? Pathetic. Desperate. I shut her down every single time. Janet, stop. You have to call before you come over. You do not just show up. Finally, she seemed to get the message. There would be no us going forward. She didn't take it well. I'll drag this divorce out as long as possible, she threatened one night. I just shrugged. Do what you have to do. The worst part of all this wasn't the betrayal itself. It wasn't even the divorce process. It was telling my daughter, sitting her down, looking into her eyes, watching the realization hit her in slow motion. And then the inevitable question. Why? I swallowed hard. Your mother had an affair. She stared at me. What? I nodded. It wasn't a mistake, I said. It wasn't an accident. It was a choice. A deliberate choice. Her face twisted. But she swallowed. Can't you try to work it out? I exhaled. No, sweetheart. I can't. Dad, would she have given me the same chance if the roles were reversed? I asked quietly. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. I could see it in her eyes. The truth she didn't want to say out loud. The next few weeks were tense. At first, she was torn. I think it was just instinct, a gut reaction to want her family to stay together. But the more time passed, the more she understood what had actually happened. And the more irritated she became with her mother. I didn't blame her. I had loved Janet once. Deeply. I and plenty of others found her stunning. She looked like Linda Carter, for God's sake. But knowing what I knew now, knowing that she had thrown away everything for that, it made her nothing to me. A non-entity. No amount of therapy or counseling was going to change that. Something must have transpired before her little hotel excursion. There was no way she just woke up one morning and decided to cheat. Maybe they were involved in an emotional affair before it turned physical. Maybe it was brewing for months. Maybe even years. But I didn't really care. Not unless it benefited me in the divorce. Since moving out, she had finally started showing some remorse. Or at least, something that looked like it. She had been so damn stoic up until the moment she was served. Then, the floodgates opened. Begging. Pleading. Bargaining. Tears. So many tears. Please, Martin. I'll do anything. Anything you want. Just don't do this. Don't throw us away. I'm not the one who threw us away, I said. I wasn't thinking. You were thinking just fine when you walked into that hotel with him. She shook her head desperately. It was a mistake. No, it wasn't. A mistake is spilling your coffee. A mistake is missing an exit on the freeway. Her lip trembled. I gestured between us. This was a decision. You just don't like the consequences. She let out a choked sob, wiping at her face. I didn't mean to. Yeah, you did. She had her fun. She took what she wanted. She threw away our marriage for a moment of selfish escape. And now? Now she regretted her new station in life. Maybe she fell out of love. Maybe she thought she'd be fine without me. But now she realized what she had lost. And she hated it. But she was an attractive woman. She would have plenty of men willing to date her. I just wouldn't be one of them. A month later, and not much has changed. The divorce process is moving, slowly. Where we live, we have to be legally separated for a full year before it can be finalized. So for now, we're just stuck in this strange limbo, defining what separation looks like in real life. Jen, my soon-to-be ex-wife, has made an offer. I'll give you whatever you want in the divorce, she said one evening, standing in the doorway of my home, like she still had any claim to it. Anything, Martin. Just go to counseling with me. I didn't even look up from my laptop. Not interested. It wouldn't be for me, she insisted. It would be for our daughter. So we can co-parent better. So we can find some kind of common ground. I snorted. Co-parent? Bullshit. She is a grown woman. She doesn't need parenting. We already found common ground. It's called legal separation. She exhaled sharply. God, you're so what? I finally looked at her. So unwilling to pretend this didn't happen? So unwilling to move on like you didn't blow up our marriage? Her face twisted in frustration. I made a mistake. No, I corrected. You made a choice. She stared at me, her lips pressing together in a tight line, before finally shaking her head. You're impossible. And you're wasting your breath. She left without another word. We went back and forth on a few things, hammering out the specifics of what separation actually meant in daily life. Only now have we finalized the terms, though the divorce itself is still being sorted out. The house was mine before the marriage, so there's no claim to it. She could try to go after my pension, the vehicles, or our vacation property. But I had counter-arguments locked and loaded. She had lived rent-free for over 20 years. She had her own money, not to mention an inheritance from her father. Maybe, I would offer a little extra in retirement, since she was a stay-at-home mom when our daughter was young. But that was it. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this with a payday. There have been a lot of questions about my daughter and the friends, if you could even call them that. My daughter isn't taking her mother's side. Yes, she's always been a mama's girl, but she's also furious with her mom. Her initial reaction had been shock, clinging to the hope that maybe we'd somehow work it out. Now, she knows it isn't going to happen. She's been limiting her interactions with her mother, but at the end of the day, that's still her mom. I get it. As for the friend group, the husbands were pissed when they realized how much their wives had enabled Jen's affair. They forced them to cut her off, which should have been the end of it. The BFF, Kathy, the ringleader, the one who seemed to take actual joy in pushing Jen to cheat. Well, turns out she never liked me at all. This was her way of getting back at me for some perceived slight. You know what they say, karma always comes back around. She got exactly what was coming to her. Turns out, she wasn't just instrumental in blowing up my marriage. She was busy wrecking her own, too. This time, the guy she was cheating with, his name was Logan. I happened to be in a bar one night when I spotted her, sitting in some dimly lit corner, all over this guy like a lovesick teenager, whispering in his ear, laughing way too hard at whatever stupid joke he told. Then came the kissing. And not just a little peck. Full on, tongue down his throat kind of kissing. I just stood there for a second, watching. Then I pulled out my phone and snapped a few pictures and a video. Alex, her latest husband, deserved to know. So, I sent them to him. Less than an hour later, my phone buzzed. Alex called and said, "Thanks for this." She's packing her shit as we speak. By the time I finished my drink and walked out of the bar, Kathy was officially homeless. The best part? Alex had a prenup, which meant Kathy wasn't getting a single cent from him. She was going to be in the poorhouse real soon. Now, as for the old fat bastard who screwed my wife. Dead. Yeah, you heard that right. Died last week while trying to have sex with some woman he picked up. I don't know whether to laugh or just shake my head. Fitting way for him to go, I suppose. And Jen? She's in counseling now. Apparently, she's dealing with severe depression.